This is the Assa Desmo. The Assa Desmo is an 8-slider cam lock which contains 2 active sidebars. This version is currently ranked as a brown belt level lock, and this video will be my first submission for brown belt. In order to make progress picking this lock, I had to remove the pins and the sidebar on one side of the lock and focus on picking one side at a time. This is my first slider lock, so it did take a bit of getting used to. I reviewed several videos on YouTube, and from watching those, I gathered a few hints on picking this lock. First off, I learned that it is helpful to raise all of the sliders into a gate at the beginning of picking. These don't have to be set into a true gate, but rather any gate. After that, simply find which slider is bound the tightest and work on raising that pin into a true gate. Usually after setting this slider, the next bound slider will be neighboring it. After 2 neighboring sliders are set, the sidebar will be able to slightly enter the core, and this will cause a bit of a false set. I prefer working on one side of the lock at a time until all of the sliders are set, and then moving on to the other. Just be mindful that as you move your pick through the lock, you will typically make contact with the sliders on the opposite side from where you are working. It helps to keep a good amount of tension on the core to keep these errant bumps from moving already set pins. I try to only release tension when I'm in contact with the slider that I am trying to set. Regardless, I do end up moving a slider out of position from time to time. If that happens, I will remove my pick from the lock and I will re-enter the opposite side to work on resetting the slider that was just affected. Another piece of advice when picking this lock is that these sliders will not behave like normal pins. When these sliders are in a gate, they seem to be locked into that position and will not move unless most, if not all of the tension is released. I found it helpful to nudge the slider forward slightly with little to no tension, and then reapply tension for the last little bit of movement into the next gate. This helped me to avoid oversetting the sliders while also increasing the audible feedback of the slider falling into position. I have set most of the sliders now, and I'm going back and forth to check for any sliders that may have been moved out of position. Sometimes the sliders will need a small bit of movement to fall back into their true gate before the lock will open. This may need to be done several times before the lock will finally start to rotate. This lock has such good tolerances that unless each pin is in precisely the right spot, the lock will not rotate. And here I have noticed that the very front pin has moved as I was trying to reset other pins with this slider, and there we are. We got the open. Alright, I'm going to take this out of the vise and show you how this works. These sliders will remain set in position. This lock can be turned both clockwise and counterclockwise. And to disassemble this lock, I'm going to reinsert the key and remove the clip on the back of the lock. This lock is a lot easier than most to disassemble. And there's the clip. And before we move on any further, let's get a pinning tray to put all of our pieces on. As you remove the core of the lock, keep tension on both of those sidebars, which are under spring tension. I will remove the left bar first. I will now remove the plunger and spring that hold tension on the sidebar. And the plunger came out, the spring is still inside. Using a pick to pull that spring out. right, now moving on to the right sidebar. Here is the sidebar. And the plunger and spring. All right. Now to remove these sliders is very simple. Just simply remove your key, and these sliders will lift out from the top to the bottom. And I'm going to start with the left side again with number 1. Number 2. Number 3. And number 4. Starting over on the right side, number 1. Number 2. Number 3. And number 4. And now this lock has been completely disassembled. I'm going to give a close-up of the core and the sliders, as well as the sidebars and the lock housing, if this will cooperate. All right. As you can see, here is the core. This is the housing for the sidebars, where they interact with the 4 sliders on that given side. And this is where the sliders are housed. The lock body has 2 notches for those sidebars to interact with. Here are the sidebars themselves. You'll see it has a thin lip on the top of each one, and that is what falls into the gates of these sliders. And here is a close-up of all the sliders, showing that none are mastered. And this has been the Assa Desmo. Thank you.